June 9th. We will jump right into the entertainment, starting with the Des Moines International Airport Terminal Area Concept Planning Update. Good morning.
Good morning. First thing I'm going to do is give you something I recommend you consider. This is the TSA, which does all the security.
Thank you.
Now has put together a system that you can apply. Oh, and this is the way you get to the internet. And they'll give you an appointment on West Des Moines, and you can get a pre-check. So if you're gonna be flying, this is something that's really helpful.
The only problem is it costs money. They should do it free.
Nothing's for free.
It's $85.
$85
Yeah.
for 5 years, $15 a year. And I was just out at the airport Friday, ran into Chris Coleman. He and I, neither one of us had our pre-checks yet. I'd applied for mine, it hadn't gone through yet. My wife had it, she shot right through, and she was waiting for me at the other end as I went through all the procedure, taking my shoes off and all this kind of stuff. So, recommend you do that. Recommend to everybody I've seen that they ought to do that if you're going to be any traveling, if you're going to doing any flying. We're here today to talk about give you a brief update. Larry Holtz said, be brief, and then he said, if there's any doubt, be brief. So we're going to try to be brief, and this is a summary of a summary. So I will tell you that the full report, the full analysis is on our website. It's quite long, but if you want to look at it, or if you want to talk to us at any later time about this and ask some of the details, we'll be happy to respond. And of course, answer any questions today. But here's how this all came about. When back in 2007, we did, as we were required to do, we did a master plan. And if you look at that master plan, it did not anticipate the problems that were coming along in 2007 and 2008, causing drastic reductions in flying. As a result, the whole 2008 plan, it doesn't really fit the bill anymore. When we set up the authority, when you folks authorized the authority, the very first theme that Rick Clark said was, we need a new terminal. And he said that a number of times throughout the last year since we've been in authority. That report that was completed in 2007, we then had a recession, we had passenger and cargo reductions, and so about a year ago, we decided it was time to take another look at it and see what we should be doing about the airport. We hired this company called Lee Fisher, which is in, you each have a copy, I think, of this presentation.
We got it from us.
If you'll flip to page, and I'll refer to pages to make it easy. Page 3, this is Lee Fisher, you can look at that later, but they're a highly qualified, internationally known company that consults with airports and others, and we hired them to take a look at our system. That was about a year ago. Took them about 7 months to prepare a terminal concept plan. I stress to you that this is just a concept, but it is quite thorough, the thing that they have done. When I say it's a concept, that means there's no architectural drawings yet. They just give us an overview as to what they think could be done with our space. If you flip to page 6, you'll see that they looked at all facets of the airport operations to see how they were doing. So as noted in page 6, you'll see that they did it with a stoplight depiction. If it's all green, we're in good shape. If it's turning into red, we're not in such good shape. You'll see that the cargo and the belly cargo is what goes into the airplane that goes along with you when you're flying that airplane. Both of those were plenty adequate. Now, cargo has dramatically decreased. The industry has changed as to how they're distributing cargo, and that's what has happened clear across the United States. They've gone more to second day trucking rather than first day, but we still have a lot of cargo there, but it's decreased dramatically. At the same time, you can see that our aviation stress chart shows that we are now in a need of doing something else. Now, this is just the aviation side. The tie downs, the conventional hangars, and the T hangars. But as you can see, right now we're doing just fine, but as we continue to grow, we're going to run into the red. If you look on page 7, this is really a critical page, and you want to take a look at that later, perhaps. But we talk in terms of MAP, million annual passengers, which is up at the top of the page, million annual passengers. Well, as you can see, and as you'll remember from when I talked to you last January, we've already, 2 years ago, we went past 2 million passengers. Last year, 2003, we went again by another 100,000 past 2 million passengers. So in other words, we're up at 2 million passengers at the end of 2013. What are the projections? Well, that's the dilemma. How do you project out what's going to happen in Des Moines? Of course, we all see all the good news that keeps coming out about how a good place this is to live. If it continues to grow, as we expect it will, we're going to continue to have a lot of use of the Des Moines Airport. As I mentioned to you in January, what has happened when we got Southwest, that caused competition. When we had competition, we had lower fees being charged to fly. As a result, we believe, we pulled back those passengers that were driving to Omaha and to Kansas City. So now that has come back, and and we've also had increased economic conditions here in Des Moines as well. So this, on page 7, this is a critical stop and go. If you'll see, if you look over on the left, if 2.5 million annual passengers, we would still be okay with the gates that we have out there. But then if you look at that line cutting across the page, you'll see that we are already in the marginal for ticketing, security, baggage, and baggage inbound and outbound, hold rooms and restrooms. So that's what we're trying to anticipate. It's always a problem when you're trying to say, here's what should be done in the next 10-year period of time, because of course you don't know exactly what it is. But we have to do the best we can, and that's why we've asked these experts to help us do the predictions. Take a look at page 8. You can see what has happened to our ridership, because as of December 12, we went over the December 2012, we went over the 2 million passenger level, and in December of 13, we went to 2.2 million. That isn't very far away from 2.3 million, as you can guess. We could be there in a couple of years. Through this year, we're already up 4.4% through the end of April. So it appears to be continuing. We'll be very close to it. If you look on page 9, you'll see what is a sliding 12-month basis, and that's where I get the figure for you of 4.4% through the end of April for the last sliding 12-month period. If you look at the next page, Des Moines International Airport passenger trend line, well, those lines are always dicey. But as you can see, if you go all the way back to 85 and then draw the line, as statisticians will do, it would show that we are continuing on the upward trend. How far will that go? It'll depend on a lot of factors, but we have to at least account for it. The next several slides I'm going to show you quickly. These are some pictures taken and show you how congested we are. The Des Moines Airport is what we call an O&D, or Origination and Destination Airport. That means we don't have, like in O'Hare, where people are arriving at all times during the day, shifting planes, going to another airline, going to another gate. We do some of that, but we're not a really that type of airport. We're an O&D. People start here and they come back here. And that's the reason why we are so crowded. If you go out there at 5 o'clock in the morning to board your plane, you're going to find a long line. It's a little bit like a church for Easter. Nevertheless, ours is every morning. So we have to be ready for that, and that's what we're going to try to do. So those pictures are just show you some of how busy it is at the Des Moines Airport. Now, now we're going to talk about the preferred land use and alternative. Flip over to page 17, if you would, please. What they did is they looked at all of the entire airport, not just the terminal. They looked at all of the land that we have available. And there are some real unknowns. One of them is the Air National Guard, and we've made some predictions as to what will go on with the Air National Guard. Through the years, when the airport was run by the city, there were opportunities there to work out with the Air National Guard. They provided our ARF, which is the Air Fire Rescue, but they will not provide that anymore after the end of September of this year because they've moved the F-16s out. But over the years, when they were providing that, you folks gave them 172 acres out there, and the bill for that, we charged them $1 a year at the airport. Now, what we hope to have happen, of course, they provide the ARF for us, which is $1 million a year amount that we have to pay to provide that service. But now they will not be providing the ARF. We've been negotiating with them now for quite some time to try to figure out what part of that 172 acres do they still want, and how much are they willing to pay for it. And I think their position is they want it all and they want to pay $1 for it. They have a lease that runs until 2060. Now we're trying to come to some compromise, and we've met with them on that goal. But as you can see on page 17, it shows that they are not going to have the whole 172 acres anymore, and we will have a part of that will come back and be available to us. Now this one shows that what would happen if we remodel the existing terminal sitting on Fluor. And this is how this consulting company would move it around. They'd move the GA into the green that you can see, the general aviation. The Air National Guard would have a smaller piece. We would put the T hangars out on the end. Air support would move down to the southeast. But the second alternative, over on page 18, they actually looked at a number of alternatives and boiled it down to 2. This one is really the preferred one. And if you will see that in this one, the passenger terminal is moved down closer to the old Army Post Road. Fortunately, we have that property. We own that property. That property was under lease to UPS. It was a long-term lease, and they were supposed to build a big cargo facility down there. But they came to us, renegotiated a couple of times, then finally came to us 3 years ago and said, our whole method of doing business has changed. We want to get out of that lease. What's it going to cost us? They paid us $7 million to get out of the lease, paid you folks $5 million, because in that lease they had a pilot charge. So you got $5 million, we got $7 million, and we got the property back. That means we have that 45 acres available to us, and that's where we believe that the new terminal will go. And that's what you're seeing there. One of the things you might say is, why don't we just remodel the existing facility? The problem is that if we're really looking out 10 or 20 years to try to remodel the current facility, we quickly run into problems and we cannot expand. We could have basically one expansion, and that would be it. And if you look out into 2020, 2024, 2000 more, we can't do it. Now on 19, you'll see the possible way we could do it and remodel the existing facilities. There are, as you can see, it's quite close to the runways. And there's where the problem is, among others, and that is that the FAA requires certain setbacks, understandably, from the runways. As a result, you very quickly run into that. We have that problem now. We currently have slots for 11 airplanes. And what this one would give us, this would get us up to 18. if we did it this way, remodeled the Fluor operation. But the problem is, we could not, under present conditions, we couldn't expand again. We'd be stuck at 18 basically forever. We believe we will get to that fairly soon, as you can see. One of the things you have to take into consideration, airplanes are changing in size all the time. The regionals, there's pressure on those not to use those as much. I came from Denver on Sunday, and it was a 737, and it was packed, which is good. That's exactly what we want. And a lot of passengers in there. But we left on a regional, but we came back on a 737. Okay, if you flip over to page 20, you'll see what would be a kind of this is a Fluor change. One of the problems there is, in order to get the car traffic in, it gets rather convoluted, as you can see by all the lines. However, it could be done. If you flip to page 21, you'll see the layout if we went to the preferred shortlist terminal alternative. Now that one then allows us to expand to 27 without any problem at all, if we ever did feel the need to do that, with 27 slots. And we think that is the best that we have seen so far. If you look on page 22, you'll see that's just the 3D image of that. Now let's talk to the tough stuff, the difficult parts, the challenge, and that's how do we pay for all this. As you can see on page 24, we have this broken down at this point into two phases, phase 1, phase 2. Phase 1 would be a 14-gate configuration. Phase 2 is an 18-gate configuration, and the thought would be is we wouldn't do phase 2 until the pressure came to add that on. But even phase 1 is a whopping amount of money. As you can see, the construction and the design, construction management, so forth, are estimated at about $420 million. That's a lot of money. However, we'll show you that there are some sources for that money. We don't have them all identified, but we will, of course, be working on that. But you can see that it would cost another $48 million to add the other 4 gates. But then if you did phase 1 and phase 2 at this particular site that we're recommending, you will see that we would then be able to expand in years to come if the demand was such. This is all demand driven. We have to try to estimate that demand, but that would then give us would show what we would have to have into the future. If you look on page 25, that will show you, if you have the opportunity to study that later, that's just a classical contractor's chart showing that what happens during various stages. If you jump clear to the bottom, you'll see that the date of beneficial occupancy there in red, that's 10 years out. So we figure realistically it's going to take us 10 years to get to this point. And we'll talk about what the phases are and the stages are that we have to go through. So this is not a quick thing, but it's the type of thing that if we're going to do it, we've already started. We've had this site study, which is literally the first step. And then we have to go to the next steps, which we will show you. Though that shows you, though, that it would be completed if it was done on time. It would be completed in 2024, 10 years from now. That timeline is preliminary. It could slide if we cannot get all the things done that we have to do. If you look at the financial capacity on page 27, you'll see the type of things that we've got to produce to do this. Because if we're going to have, start at the top. It says other for 18 million up at the top. Those are things like customer facility charges, which are added on to each ticket. We're talking about state vertical infrastructure funds. Those are not large, but we get those now, and those are distributed, I believe, by a statutory formula, and we get some money now for that. That is another possibility. The other, we currently have a rental charge that we impose on rental cars of $2.75 a day, and that generates money for us at the airport, and that would be another possible source to cover that 18 million. If you'll go around to the right, you'll see the AIP. That's the Airport Improvement Program, which is the federal program, and that they allot a certain amount of money every year. That's been dicey through the years, but we've always gotten some money and sizable amounts of money every year. And that's a federal program, and they allocate it to all the airports throughout the United States. Anything that we do in our own cash, we've got to do a 90-10 split. We have to come up with our own money of 10% at this present time, and they will give us 90%. If you look over to the left, Des Moines cash, 56 million. That's just, we have to generate that out of our operations. Then to the revenue bonds, what we would have to do there is we would have to issue bonds in that amount, and that would be supported by the revenue of the airport, just like all other bonds are. Down to the left, we have PFC bonds. That would be the federal government and the FAA allows us to impose a charge for for each ticket, and currently it's $4.50 per in-plane passenger. And that amount is then always used for specific things. We can't just use it for general operating. We'll have a specific project that we have to do, and they'll allow us to use that money for that purpose. So that would be $66,000 estimated. The PFC pay-as-you-go, that's because we would be able to use about $5 million of that per year to cover that amount. Now the big amount, though, the big question mark is over to the right in the green. Non-AIP grants, $200 million. That, I will say, we're not going to start this project except to get approvals until we have this money locked in. And where would we get that? That one, we will be going to the state, we'll be going to any other sources of money. I realize that the city of Des Moines probably is going to be asked to give some money, but I don't know whether you're going to have any money. We'll find out. That $200 million has to be covered somehow. Kevin is currently, well, of course, we started on that. There will be consultants, of course, that we can hire that will help us generate that amount of money. And Kevin has been working to come up with these types of lists of opportunities that we might have to try to raise that money. That's let's call it a major challenge, because that's going to be tough to get that. These other amounts are certainly within reason and capable of happening. The 200 million, and that's
Ed, have you or Kevin had discussions at the federal government level, our congressional delegation, as to their thoughts on the price tag and what you're looking at?
No. The only people that we've talked to federally is the FAA, and the FAA has seen this all the way through. But of course, they're a big chunk of financing this. But we have not talked to anyone, either state or federal, as far as the 200 million shortfall, because I don't have a plan to take to them yet. The board has not yet adopted the plan, and the FAA has not yet approved the plan. I have to have something to take to them. But the FAA certainly has been informed all along.
Our next step is tomorrow. We've had 2-3 sessions at the board level to discuss this, interview it, and ask questions and meet with the consultants and so forth. Our next step, though, is to consider it tomorrow at our board meeting as to whether we adopt this plan. And as you can see, there aren't any architects that draw on this yet. There haven't been any accountants run the numbers, but this is a highly qualified company that tells us this can be done this way. So tomorrow we will, if we adopt the plan, the next step is we send it to the FAA, because you can't do anything without the FAA first saying, we've seen the plan, we like the plan, or here's what we think you should change. Now, that'll go next. That could take 6 months for them to review. And then, in the meantime, we're going to be talking to the other major constituency at this level, which is the airlines. Because the airlines will have a lot of input on this, because some of this money, of course, is going to be, we're going to have to collect from, through the system as I've described.
Ed, on that, the red piece of the pie, Des Moines cash, you said that's got to come out of operating funds. Is that from the international airport?
Yeah.
So then between it and the AIP combined, it's about 130 million that the airport's got to come up with.
If that's what the total is, let's say 130, that'd be right. That's the AIP, that's the federal government.
Okay.
Federal government gives us that money. And that does come every year. The federal government sometimes have trouble, the Congress has trouble agreeing, instead of giving us a long-term amount that we know we will get. Sometimes it just comes every year, but it always comes. It's never not come.
Ed, do you want to just keep taking questions at random as
That's
people
your
think of it,
choice.
or would you like to finish your presentation?
We can quickly finish and open it up for questions if you'd like.
Would you please?
If you look on page 28, these are just the sensitivity tests, and we're happy to talk to you about those at a later time. And that basically tells you things we want to make sure we don't hit. If you'll see at the top, that's a big one, target financial metrics, cost per enplaned passenger. We want to make sure that our cost per enplaned passenger does not exceed $13.50, because that's a number that the airlines get very concerned about. So we're going to try to keep it under that. We want to make sure that our debt service charge is always at least $1.65. Ours currently are 1.65 times. Currently, we are very healthy at 2.11 as our minimum debt service. So we're in good shape, very good shape there now. And finally, we don't want to increase our debt per enplaned passenger beyond $165. Now let's take a quick look at and then we'll open up for questions. Here, if you look over on page 30, there are the conclusions. You'll hear that word challenging, because it is challenging. From a financial perspective, unless there's a minimum of $200 million state, local grant, and assuming the FAA funds 90% of all the apron, taxiway, and roadway costs. FAA has been very good to us here in Des Moines the last few years, as I mentioned to you in January, especially since we became an authority here a couple of years ago. They've been and we've done some shifting personnel, and things have gone very well. There are two types of grants, and one is the discretionary, and that's the one that they have the discretionary ability to give us a grant. We've done very well there. Now, what we're going to do is the next steps. We're going to approve the plan tomorrow, assuming we do. We're going to send it to the FAA for their review, and we're immediately going to start to talk with the airlines and get their engagement. That's exactly what's happening currently in Kansas City. They're talking about a new terminal, and they've been talking with the airlines. The media reports they've been pushing back a little bit, as could be expected. And also in Omaha, they're considering and are planning an expansion. Again, pushback for the airlines. We expect interesting conversations with them, and they've been very cooperative so far, but it's our job to make sure that they understand and agree with what we're going to do. That's really the end of it, Frank, and we're happy to answer any questions. The last page, page 31, just some of our final thoughts on this, cautioning that this is just a site study. I think it's well done, but it doesn't have any actual architecture drawings and the like. We have a 1948 building. We've done everything we can to keep it up to date. It looks pretty good as long as you don't go downstairs, but and you don't need to. But we've tried to keep it operational. We hope that passenger activity increases. We've got a long lead time here. We hope that the Air National Guard, we work out a deal with them. I'm sure we will sooner or later. And because there are some pressure points coming on that they're going to have to agree to something fairly soon. And as noted there at the bottom, all this is demand-driven. If the demand fades for any reason, major economic recession, whatever happens, of course, we'd have to slide it forward, and the deadline, the planned date of beneficial operation of 2024 would have to slide forward. That'd be true if we can't line up the money, or it takes longer to line up the money. So at that point, we're pleased to try to answer any questions. Larry, I hope I've met your admonition to be brief.
Perfect, right on time.
Thank you.
All right, Christine.
You mentioned Omaha and Kansas City, Ed. Could you talk a little bit about, I guess I'm a little bit nervous about Des Moines coming in now, where the Omaha and Kansas City are at, if they're already talking with the airlines. Is that problematic for us going after that, the $200 million that we need? They're going to be going after the same dollars.
I suppose we're going to be going after some different, we'll be going after the state of Iowa, for example. We would
But I mean, the state
anticipate
of
some of the local communities, all of the central Iowa benefits from the Des Moines airport. I mean, you can imagine, if you stop for a minute and think, what would happen if we didn't have that airport? Or what would happen if we didn't have the airport that we have right now?
So what I hear you saying then is the $200 million is going to be more at the state and local level versus federal.
Most likely.
Most likely.
I don't know what's available on the federal side. There's grants out there that are kind of camouflaged under the federal grant policies that I don't know what I don't know yet on the federal side. But we are going to look heavily at the state and local area. This airport serves all of central Iowa, and so it has a tremendous impact on the entire state. But we are going to look federally as well for that $200 million. But as far as the airlines are concerned, where it affects them is in their rates and charges. The $13.50 per plane passenger, those are costs that we charge them. Right now, we're at $8.90 per plane passenger. We anticipate that it's going to have to go up if we do this. Their threshold of pain is about $14 per plane passenger. We set a limit of $13.50. We don't want to go over that because that's when the airlines will start pushing back.
So
Kevin, could you for the benefit of, in sort of a flesh out of that question, how are the employments doing in Omaha and Kansas City, for instance? Are they seeing increases like we are? Are they not?
Both Omaha and Kansas City for the last 2 years have seen fairly substantial decreases in plane passengers. Now, the first couple of months of this year, Omaha is up about 2%. Kansas City is up about the same for the first several months, but they're recovering. Now, they got hit a little bit harder because they're what's called a medium hub. We're a small hub, and the medium hubs took the biggest hit when the airlines changed their operating procedures. In other words, when they started getting rid of the RJs and bringing in the larger aircraft.
Regional jets.
Yeah, the regional jets, and started bringing in the 737s and the Airbus 320s, the larger airplanes. The medium hubs took that had a bigger impact on them than it did on the small hubs. That's part of the reason, but the rest of the reason is because we're capturing our leakage. We're keeping our passengers here in Des Moines.
And probably because of the ticket pricing is better?
Almost entirely. Most all tickets are bought strictly on the cost of the ticket. We don't calculate time generally when we're looking at travel. In other words, if it's $50 cheaper to fly out of Omaha, I don't calculate the 2 hours that it takes to drive to and from Omaha. It's just $50 cheaper on that ticket. Now, businesses may calculate that, but certainly leisure travel does not. So it's based on the ticket price.
So will you be able to still stay competitive if we add these additional charges to each ticket? Compared to once we build this and now we're not.
Right.
Now we're going to be back in the same spot that we were.
This is cost per plane passenger. You're looking at about a $5 bump per ticket. This is not the impact on the ticket costs that people may envision. But this is an impact on their bottom line, on the airline's bottom line. $5 per plane passenger, we had about 1.1 million in plane passengers last year. That would be $5.5 million spread across. Right now, we're looking at 3 legacy carriers, 1 low-cost carrier, and 2 ultra-low-cost carriers. So you spread that out over 6 airlines.
How many gates do we have right now?
11.
We have 11, so the first phase will be 14 gates, so we're gonna add 3 more gates.
Correct, and spread the gates. Right now, some of our gates are, because the majority of our traffic is in the morning, in that early morning
Yeah.
push, and all the airlines want to get back into the system at the same time, early in the morning. Right now, our gates are built for DC-3s and RJs, so we can get 2 gates on, or 2 aircraft on each gate. When you go to the larger airplanes, we can only get 1 airplane on each gate. That means a
But
scheduling change for the airlines because it takes time to load an airplane, get it launched, pull another airplane up to the gate. We may have the same number of airplanes sitting in Des Moines, they're just not on the gate, as opposed to just pulling the gate over, load the second plane and launch them right away. It slows them getting into the system, slows the airlines getting the aircraft back into the system.
So you're saying the amount of passengers that are flying out to, I mean, we need the bigger planes that are leaving here, that we have that type of demand here?
Our demand, our passenger enplanements this year are up 4.4% over last year. Last year, they were up 5.8% over 2012. 2012 was the first year that we broke 2 million passengers ever here. So our passenger numbers are increasing.
Okay.
All right, any other questions at the moment?
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thanks for the presentation. We kept it right at 37 minutes. There we go. All right, next item on our agenda today is the Task Force on Demolition and the ordinance update connected thereto.
Mayor, members of the council, Jason Van Essen with the city's planning staff. We'll get the PowerPoint going. Diane, does it show on the, oh, okay, there we go. Sorry, jumping the gun. A little over a year ago, we had a Lundstrom house south of Grand that was demolished, and that was kind of a tipping point for some folks in the community. They came before you and asked that we look at, is there an opportunity to do something here where we can at least have some dialogue on some of our more significant structures in town before demolition. So at that council meeting, Mayor's Task Force was set up to look at this issue. We have the list of citizens. We tried to get a cross mix of individuals on that. Councilmember Hensley and Mayor County also participated in those meetings. Held 4 meetings, and then earlier this year in March, we gave a presentation to you summarizing a recommendation from that task force on a process that could be adopted here in Des Moines, very similar to an ordinance and a process that's being utilized in Cedar Rapids. At that workshop, we had a lot of feedback, and probably the 2 points that stuck out to us most was questions that you had regarding the length and complexity of the process, and then also looking at a point of age for decision-making with regard to what structures go through this process or are looked at. So we took that, and we've spent some time and are coming back to you with some other ideas for you to give us some feedback on before we go further down the process and invest more time in drafting ordinance language and that sort of thing. Before I get into the kind of the changes and the processes and the concepts, there's a few things I want to hit on that I think are very important. One, that the idea of doing a demolition review ordinance is not to replace the existing landmark or historic preservation ordinance or the landmark designation process. It's easy to get these mixed up, but this is really, it would be its own ordinance, its own process. And the last thing that's in key as to what this is not is that it's not a prohibition of demolition. What it is a pause. It's an opportunity for us to have dialogue and manage our community's character in a thoughtful manner. In most cases, the different alternatives, I'm going to walk you through the impact to most property owners that were wishing to go through the demolition and be 10 days or less. And the only absolute in any of these alternatives that we've talked about, or only prohibition or absolute, is the documentation for those structures that are significant enough to warrant documenting them for future reference before they're demolished. So for expectations, in most cases, we're looking at documentation and looking at all at options for salvage, both from a architectural historic salvage standpoint. A building that's going to be demolished can be an organ donor kind of situation where there's elements or parts of that building that can be reused in a building being renovated and kept. And I think that's a lot of what we heard with the Lundstrom house, that there wasn't even an opportunity there to use the parts for other buildings. But I don't want to undersell the opportunities that having a pause creates with regard to either saving or moving structures. This is a great example. This is the row house, Norton Hall in the East Village, that was recently moved. And in this case, we were fortunate enough that this was a local landmark. And so we had a mechanism to create a pause for dialogue. Otherwise, the state would have tore this building down and we wouldn't be able to keep it within the East Village and keep it a part of our fabric. The picture to the left is a picture from the 50s of the structure before it was altered. So getting back to your input from the workshops, the task force recommendation is we looked at creating a threshold of 50 years old or older for buildings to go through this review. This is based on a national standard for listing properties on the National Register. 50 years old or older is a general kind of established age. As staff, we've looked at the concern about perhaps this is too broad in our community, perhaps that there's a very large percentage of our community has been built before 1964, which would be 50 years back from today. And then an alternative that could be considered that we thought was reasonable as staff would be 80 years old or older. This gets us back to 34, basically World War II. I think that pre-World War II, this is really where a lot of our structures of significance that we have currently are within that age range. The other thing that we thought would be good to partner with this, and this actually comes out of concerns that with the task force members raised, is we looked at how do you pick ages. Sometimes you have newer buildings that are of merit that warrant dialogue or designation before they turn 50 years old. So we thought there would be an opportunity to do an exceptional architectural merit clause. And I did put this PowerPoint together before I knew this was on tonight's agenda, so I was completely a coincidence. But this is a good example of a great building in the downtown that is less than 50 years old or older. Of course, now we're getting close to it actually being 50 years old or older, or hitting that 50-year mark. But this is obviously an example of a great architecture that I think most could agree would be sad to lose, and if by chance we were faced with that. Fortunately enough that we're not. They're going to invest in this property, and it's going to continue to be an asset to the downtown. So that's kind of an alternative for that concern that we heard for age ranges and being too broad at 50. The other thing that we did was look at the processes. We have three alternatives. Alternative A is the process that presented to you back in March. This is what the task force put together. And I do want to say that as with the task force, we spent a lot of time working on this, and a lot of thought went into it. So I definitely want to thank them for their diligence, and we'll continue to work with them as we move forward. So just in summary, with this alternative, there's a initial review done by staff, and then if staff believes that it's historically significant or not, then it moves on to the Landmark Review Board. One thing that we also did for this workshop is put together flow charts, because I think we recognize that's a little easier for everybody to digest. So this is alternative A, and hopefully I'll try to be brief without being confusing. But so building comes in, it's 50 years old or older. That's the first question that the counter staff would ask at the permit counter. If it's not, then permits would be issued and it'd go through the normal process. If it does meet that age threshold, the next set of questions would be, is it a threat to public safety? Is it a deck, porch, steps, or other similar element? Or is it an addition that happens to be less than 50 years old, but the main structure is older? If it hits any of those thresholds, then the permit would be issued. If it's not, then a demo review application would be required. So we'd have that initial 10-day review period. During that time, the community development director or designee would consult with the chairs of the Historic Preservation Commission, the Urban Design Review Board, and then make a determination as to whether or not the building was significant or potentially significant. And just a quick point, the Landmark Review Board is actually a super committee or super board of the Historic Preservation Commission and the Urban Design Review Board put together. So that's the point of talking to those two chairs. So if within this 10-day period staff says it's fine, we'd issue the permit and the building would come down. If staff determined it was sniffing or not, then we'd move on in the process. It would be forwarded to the Landmark Review Board for their review, and basically we would set up a meeting, have dialogue with the owners, developers, and try to see, essentially make a good faith effort to see if there's any alternatives to demolition. This is going to be very case by case, situational based. There's going to be, there's we have to be a little bit broad in our language because this is thought of as covering things from a simple single-family house, an owner that perhaps just would rather, or I would think one thing that we're seeing is banks, acquiring houses, and it's easier for them if they can't unload them to demolish them, all the way to the far end of the opposite end of the spectrum of developer that's done a lot of due diligence and put together land. So while it may sound, using the term a good faith effort sounds kind of generic, but it's needed to be that way so we can address each one of those situations which are completely different. You may have a property owner more back on the small-time property owner that isn't aware of historic tax credits or isn't aware of, hasn't really thought about, well, is there somebody out there that actually would be interested in buying this property? Like I said, all the way to the more complex developer that's already done that due diligence. So anyway, there would be that dialogue, and then if no alternative could be found that was mutually agreeable, then the building would be documented and salvage would be encouraged. So summary, alternative A, 10-day initial review process, up to 60 days when warranted by the Landmark Review Board, a maximum review period of 70 days, and then most things would be done in 10 days or less. Alternative B is probably the most streamlined way to do something of this nature. It's 100% staff review. And for the alternative B and C, I went with the 80-year-old threshold, but you could plug in the different numbers here. So it starts out the same. Is it 80 years older, or does it have architectural merit? Not. Permits are issued. You go through that threat to public safety, same situation there, yes or no. Then the demo review application is required. The director would make an initial determination whether or not something was significant, yes or no. If it is, then there would be a kind of a secondary process with staff where we would go through that same sort of dialogue, alternatives, looking to see, if we think that buildings could be moved, or providing information on financing, alternatives, and then at the end of the day require the documentation, the salvage, if we can't find an alternative. So 10-day review, initial, 30 days when warranted, maximum review period of 40 days, most done in 10 days or less. And actually point out that we've been doing this informally we haven't actually required an application form, but we've been our counter staff has been working with myself and Mary Niederbach whenever a building comes in. So we have some experience as to kind of this process. Alternative C is a little bit of a hybrid. It's a little more administrative than alternative A, but still has an outlet for public hearings on a process or within the process. So, let's see, I'll just go ahead and I'm just going to dive right into it, explain it then. So, 80 years old or older, architectural merit, threat to public safety, that sort of thing. Then you get down to the demo review application required. So here is where it gets a little different. Within that first 10-day period, you would have the director or designee would have the option, would determine, is it historically significant or not? If it's not, permits issued. Is it significant but not landmark eligible? Is it a structure that if it was in a district would be considered a contributing structure to that district? Or would it be a pivotal structure? And a pivotal structure would be something that we think of more as that could be listed on the National Register individually and would be landmark eligible. So if it falls within that B, then it's going to go through a staff process similar to the alternative B, where within 30 days staff would work to try to look at alternatives, and at the end of the day, if an alternative can't be found, document and salvage would be done. If it was determined that it was a building that was potentially landmark eligible, the way we've set this up for your review is that it would be referred to you as the city council, and there would be a 14-day period. That's just 14 days essentially to get something put together and get on your agenda to get before you. And at that point, you would have some staff analysis and then would make the determination as to whether to approve demolition or to forward it to the Landmark Review Board for their review and consideration. And then obviously if the council within this process said demolition is fine, then we'd still want to do that documentation and salvage. If it did get referred to the Landmark Review Board, then we'd kind of go through the same process. We'd hold a meeting with them, have dialogue, and then, ultimately within this ordinance, the endpoint would be the same. This would allow public dialogue and an opportunity for landmark designation as its own process that would coincide with this, so there's enough time. But once again, I want to reiterate that this is, in and of itself, is its own thing. So, summary of alternative C, up to 10 days initially, staff review unless potentially landmark eligible, sent to council and if potentially landmark eligible. Council refers to the Landmark Review Board for recommendation or approves demolition. Maximum review period for staff only 40 days. If it went through that whole process of going before the council and then Landmark Review Board, it could be up to 114 days, but most done in 10 days or less. So just to kind of reiterate, this is not a duplication of the existing historic preservation ordinance or the process that's currently in place to designate landmarks. It's not a prohibition of demolition. It's a pause to allow dialogue, thoughtful management of our character. The impact to most is 10 days or less with the processes that we've put together in these outlines, and the process as we've established to date. All three alternatives do not. The only absolute is documentation. Looking for your feedback today. We anticipate, this is just an anticipated process, or as we move forward, workshop feedback. We would work on an ordinance kind of language, getting this a little finer tuned for everybody's consideration, both the task force, relevant city boards and commissions. And then before anything can be established, you'd have to hold have three readings of an ordinance. So happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? Skip?
Your very first flow chart that was under alternative A, the middle box, last bullet point, says addition that is less than 50 years old. If yes, permits are issued. Is this for the addition only, or what if the main building?
Yes,
Is-
it's for the addition only. What, we didn't want to tie up a process for a non-historic addition to be removed while the,
While the balance of it's being considered?
yeah, why, you don't want to penalize somebody that's removing a non-historic addition and working on the main structure by making them go through a process.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Bob?
How many units are currently on the demolition list?
For the public nuisance, let me see if Phil or, did I see Sue walk in? 60? 30?
30,
30 to 60, is that what you're saying? Okay.
36.
Yeah.
Do you think this will speed up the process, addressing these that needs to be done?
I think that's pretty much, and Larry looks like maybe he wants to jump in, a funding issue.
You know, the process on public nuisance has its own, have to go to court, have to get permission, that takes plenty of time. I think this would probably fit in within it, but it could delay, and it could make a public nuisance, you know, roll into some of these other considerations. So it could, but I think it would overlap and be within what it takes to go to court and get all those movements done. And I don't know, Phil, if you know how many demolitions we do a year?
Probably about 10.
And not just public nuisance, but applications to demolish a building.
Yeah, Larry, we issue about 200 demolition permits a year for single-family dwellings. Mr. Mahaffey, your question is on public nuisance structures and whether they would be slowed down or accelerated, and there is an exclusion in here for those properties that have been determined to be a public nuisance and a threat to public safety. So while there could be some historic elements of those buildings, the idea here is that if it's a threat to the public, it will be expedited. Expedited through this process, not through the constrained process where we lack the resources to take down everything that's needed.
I guess I was looking for something you could speed up some of these, because some of them are on for a long period of time, and we get calls all the time, you know, how long are we going to allow this to continue? And
I think that's
Completely
my-
understood, and that's a separate topic, but we also are looking for ways to speed that up, and it really comes down to the resources. So at this point, we're trying to fine-tune that process and find additional resources.
And we can do a workshop on the public nuisance part, because we get questions on that, I bet, every other week, where there's a property that's driving people crazy. There seem to be, as I hear it, kind of choices for the council to pick in your presentation. You go with A, B, C. You also have to decide, you know, is it 50 years as a kind of threshold to look at, the 80-year? The difference between the A, B, and C, you know, C has council involvement, B had staff working it, kind of like we do now, and A had the chairs of the boards that look at historic issues consulting with the staff. All three had different timelines of time it takes. Today, what we do, there is not a formal process, but as Jason said, we try to watch for, if we saw certain buildings come up on the demolition list, we would, you know, take a good hard look at them. You know, the market kind of looks at it now. There's no procedure. However, the Lestron House was one that brought this, you know, to a head. There was a building that, and I remember the discussion before the council that night. Maybe it could have been moved, maybe not. At the very least, it could have been documented, and at the very, very least, it could have been parted out, elements of it saved for other repairs on Lestron houses. And that wasn't available at all because, you know, if you meet the demolition rules, it can come down because we have no real teeth on some properties. And that's one that got through, that really brought up this issue and set up the task force. What is the right balance between a property owner's right to demolish a property and move on versus the public's right because there's this historic or an architectural or something about that property that should be preserved or at least discussed to be preserved in some fashion? So that's where your choice is, kind of that continuum.
Skip?
Larry, I believe one of the big issues with the Lestron House was they took out a permit when the doors opened, and within half an hour, they were demolishing the house.
Yes, sir. It was very fast. You get a permit, if the cuts are done and all the procedures and the bonding, whatever is required in the permit, it can be done relatively quickly. Absolutely right, correct.
I believe we got 4 on our list tonight, and once that's approved by council, about how long does it take to get those demolished?
On the public nuisance, Phil, maybe you can help me out. Once they're on your list, you're authorizing the court to hear it, and depending on the court docket, and Mr. Lester may add to it, there can be some time just getting permission. You know, there's a certain amount of, you got to let the property owner know and make sure they know and give them an opportunity to cure. Many of our properties that are on the list actually don't get demolished. People finally decide, you know what, I think I could fix that up instead of losing the property. But Phil, do you want to talk about the percentages?
Sure. Mr. Mahaffey, the current limitations on the demolition budget force us to make some choices. So those with the highest priority, first of all, let me try to address your question directly. Once we have court authority and budget for demolition, we can generally take those down within 60 to 120 days. But because of the limitations of the budget, we are forced to make some choices and prioritize the public nuisance structures. Some are of a nuisance nature that they aren't putting as much threat to the public, so those are lower priority. Some are salvageable and might be rehabbed, and if the opportunity presents itself for rehab through a third party, we move it to that process. Those with the highest priority then are the ones that are moved through the engineering department and demolished. And that's a moving target because buildings continue to deteriorate or in some instances come off the list because they are repaired. So generally 60 to 120 days if the budget is there. We have sufficient funding using our CDBG funds for perhaps 10 a year.
Phil, we recently did an emergency demolition on Holcomb. When we do an emergency, evidently they're being pulled out of further down the line and moved up to the front. So does that move all the rest back a little bit further?
Yes, Mr. Moore, absolutely it does. When we have to take an emergency action, and there are a few of those that we need to do occasionally, it pushes the others down the list.
Thank you.
Christine?
Thanks, Jason, for this. I'm a little bit more confused after hearing the second time the alternative C. I heard this earlier, and I think what you're looking for is some direction from the city council. I like the 80-day or the 80-year threshold. I think that that's more realistic. I think it's important that we have the documentation. My question on documentation is, who does the documentation? What additional cost does that add? And then secondly, if you could talk about the timeline, and we talked about this, that even though we're talking about additional time here, that there would be it's consistent with what the property owners have to go through if they're looking at asbestos in the building and removal of the asbestos, and can they be running on a parallel track?
Sure. The first question regarding the documentation and process, we anticipate creating a forum basically for individuals to use, and we don't have any expectations that it's going to be as extensive as, say, if you're documenting something through the Section 106 process with the state, where you might have to hire an architectural historian.
So they could do it themselves?
Yeah.
For
and we may have actually resources on hand of some information that they, if it's a larger project, their architect could easily put together, take some photographs, write what they know about the building.
Okay.
It's going to be really based case by case, because I envision, we'll have simpler cases with the simpler residential structure versus downtown. So I don't anticipate much of a cost there. It's more about the time to take it to do that. And then the second question about asbestos. I don't see any reason why the permitting and review process for those other activities couldn't be done coincidentally with that review. Obviously, we're not going to issue a permit to cut plumbing which is the first step before you demo a building, those sorts of things. But if there's the putting together your game plan for demolition, and then obviously anything that, removing that sort of material, that's interior demolition, which we're not talking about reviewing that, we're just talking about complete demolition. So you'd be able to pull permits to do work interior-wise regardless of this process.
Okay, thank you.
Jason, one of the things that I think we've left out of this discussion is some of the dialogue that took place with the citizen committee, if you will, that we had. I think that the input that staff gave us that said, I believe we have over 50,000 structures that are over 50 years old. So we do realize it's a huge burden. And some of them, I think, in discussion with everybody that was there, probably are not significant enough that they would rise to wanting to save it. However, as you have pointed out, I think that there are a number of structures that probably are even newer than 50 years that probably should be protected because they're significant either in design or for other reasons. The thing that I think was brought forward to all of us is the additional process that may take place that would sort of nominate structures and, in neighborhoods and almost make any of these age limits permissible in terms of picking up the process in terms of time and from start to demolition. But on the other hand, would identify either by a citizen identification, a neighborhood identification, or a owner identification of structures that they felt were significant enough to be registered as significant. Now, whether they are historically, landmarked or whatever, that's a different issue. But I think that we went through that whole process that I think was a discussion that needed to take place because the majority of these folks that were on that group have spent a lot of time, in some cases, Christine, doing the documentation that we're talking about of some of these structures in terms of photographs and history and all that stuff. So many of them understand that process. So for anybody that's listening and watching, we have more to it than just this ABC piece that has been presented.
Yeah, a lot of great ideas came out of the task force. And in March, when we gave the presentation, about half of it was focused on the ordinance dialogue, and the other half was on the other ideas that have come forward and the opportunities for partnerships and to continue to try to list properties and work with neighborhood groups to identify what they see as valuable as well. And any information, if we end up adopting some sort of demo review ordinance, any information they can provide us just makes the process better regardless of which path we choose to go down.
In terms of that nomination, would some of those nominations then go before the Historic Preservation Board, if you will, or how, moving forward on that piece of
Sure.
it?
I would like to see more activity on the proactive side with regard to nominating things to the city's local landmark list. And we talked about that with the task force, and essentially, that's a process where you submit the form. This is an existing process, and goes before the Landmark Review Board, Planning and Zoning Commission, and then ultimately to the City Council, because the City Council is where the authority is to designate something as a local landmark. So we're hopeful to, kind of through this process, get people thinking along those lines and being more proactive.
All right, anybody have any other questions? Jason, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's now move on to our Community Development Block Grant DR Multifamily Production Round 6 Overview and Criteria.
Thank you for the introduction. Matt Anderson, Assistant City Manager. A brief summary of the CDBG DR program, particularly for Councilman Gatto and Gray, who weren't here for the previous 5 rounds. You're used to the acronym CDBG, Community Development Block Grant. The DR is disaster recovery. These are funds that were federal funds related to the 2008 flood. A significant portion, as it turns out, still have not yet been expended. Awards were made around the state. Developers, for one reason or another, were not able to utilize the funds, and they've been returned back to the state pool. The state's trying to get those out and into production. So we've got another round, one that we've kind of been anticipating, but it's bigger than we expected, which is good news. The state has $50 million available in this 6th round. 30 million is being reserved for the 9 largest cities of 50,000 or over. So you do some quick math. If each one of those 9 cities got, and you have to keep in mind these are $3 million allocations, so there would be 27 million, and then another project available. They can award less, but the projects that have come through with us have asked for that $3 million cap. So if you do some math, we're real likely to get one project at least and have a nice competitive shot at getting a second one. Cedar Rapids, because of the devastation in that city during the 2008 floods, can submit more than one application, but we are going to be able to, or more than 2, but we are limited to 2 applications, just like we were in the last round.
When they say more than 2, what does that mean?
I don't know if they're
Can they
cap married.
submit 10?
Yeah, they could submit 10. They've got to be competitive in a scoring system, though, and I'll get to that in a bit. But yes, Cedar Rapids could submit 10. They're not likely to get 10 awarded, but they're not capped on how many they could submit. The other 8 cities are capped at 2.
The same as we could submit 2 and we may get none.
Right, exactly. Yep. So yeah, there's some objective and subjective scoring once it hits that state level on what they'll award and what they won't. 50. Go forward. So we have a time frame that's more aggressive than we had thought it would be as we started working backward. What we're going to recommend or hope that you will advise us on is that we're going to essentially use the same scoring system that we used last time for picking and development. We thought that worked really well, and I'll get to those criteria, but this is our time frame. We're going to submit essentially an RFP to developers in the next week or so. We'd like to give developers 6 weeks to get proposals back to us by the end of July. Staff will review those during the month of August, and at your second council meeting in August, make a recommendation on which 2 to select. And then you have the state time frame on the right, September 2nd. We have to submit. They will review them during the winter, make a recommendation in January, and then development needs to get going and started in April 1. So that's a pretty aggressive timeline, and we'll probably limit the projects that are going to come in. And they're really, we used the term shovel-ready on the last round, and it's going to be the same case this round, and you'll see that in some of these criteria. So the state shovel-ready, which means zoning in place, land ownership under control. There's no unit cap, as we run into at the low-income housing tax credits funding. There's no unit cap per unit cap. No construction in a floodplain, and this is not to be used in conjunction with low-income housing tax credits.
Is that that's a new, right?
Yeah, I think that was
Is that
last
been
time
there?
too.
Okay.
Yeah, and part of that is the shovel readiness, because you don't know, you aren't guaranteed you're going to get those low-income housing tax credits.
Well, yeah, that timeline wouldn't have
It doesn't work.
worked.
Yeah, they don't work well together. So IEDA, the state, has their own priorities that they're going to be looking for, so we're going to be looking for those too as they come in through our process. We want to forward on the projects that stand the best chance of getting selected by the state. So we're going to be very mindful of what the state's looking for in these. Pretty simple: affordability, sustainability, market need, the relationship to the disasters of 2008, adaptive reuse, which bodes well for Des Moines. We have a lot of adaptive reuse projects out there. Infill, we have a lot of infill needs in the neighborhoods and in downtown, and availability of activity across the state. So they're looking to spread this out and not give the 10 projects all to Cedar Rapids. They're looking to spread the impact. So things we'll be looking for: zoning in place as part of that, shovel readiness, the notification of neighborhood organizations, and infill sites. So we had a number of infill sites come in last time, and we'd like to continue that trend. kind of goes to the but-for argument that I'm going to get to later, because the infill sites are generally the ones that need that $3 million boost to get them over a hump to get the project actually done. So the scoring criteria that we're recommending, it's similar to the one that we used last time. Developer qualifications and financing committed, goes back to my shovel readiness term again. A project needs to be going by April 1 or the state's going to pull the funds back. We don't want to do that. If we have a project that we recommend, we want to know that it's a project that's going to get done. So we're looking for a developer with the capability of doing so. Any environmental issues that need to be addressed, there's a plan in place to do that, whether it's in an existing building or it's, say, soil conditions or groundwater conditions on an infill site. The leverage, so there we're looking at both leverage in terms of dollars and units. And then a unique market and location. Mixed use is something that we're going to encourage, mixed use or mixed income. Mixed use is not going to be a requirement because mixed use doesn't work in all neighborhoods. You can't force commercial activity or restaurant activity or something into a strictly residential neighborhood. But we're going to look favorably upon mixed use and mixed income projects, or projects that are in an area where city staff and the neighborhoods are already working together in some planning efforts, and this money coming in can help boost those efforts. And then this is where we get some subjectivity that we can use, that we don't get stuck to a rigid objective scoring system, some wow and transformative measures. Who comes in with a project that we hadn't thought of yet? Something outside the box you really do, you pick up the folder and you look at the cover and you're like, wow, I hadn't thought of that. That's great for that neighborhood. What a great project. So we're looking for something that can also, in that vein, leverage other development in the area. If you've got something across the street that's likely to get triggered and go because somebody cleans up one corner. So that's important in those infill sites in particular. And then the but-for argument. That was a strong argument in the selection of Tim Ritma's project in the East Village last year for CDBG DR. We had a number of proposals that had come forward on the site. They all had financial gaps that were too big. And really, but for the state's money, because it was a small site and not a very efficient site, we didn't have the ability to plug that financial gap ourselves. And so there was that but-for argument to really boost a project that hadn't been able to get off the starting line to begin with. That's it, nice and short. If you have any concerns, let me know. Any direction you'd like us to go instead in our scoring criteria. But again, we're going to be looking at what is the state looking for. We don't want to get embarrassed and have to give any funds back, and we want to get projects going in that April 1 timeline. So this will be administered out of Mary Niederbach's office in community and neighborhood development, as all CDBG monies are. We'll get that we'll get that final RFP out to the developers, as we said, in the next week or so. And we have a long list, kind of a database of normal developers that we work with, so we'll make sure that gets distributed very broadly because of site control and zoning and those quick fuse items that'll limit the number of proposals that we'll get in. I'm not going to guess right now, but it won't be a huge list, I don't think.
And so the criteria is identical to the last round?
Did we change that? Not identical.
Can you share what the difference was?
I think the but-for, did we add that?
We added the but-for. There are some changes on the financing committee because at this point I'm not really sure about IEDA reports, housing credits or historic credits. Before, if you didn't have the credits sold, we took some points off at this point. I'm not sure who passed their historic credits in mind because of those changes to the state.
Okay.
Those are the biggest changes. We also added in the focused planning area as a unique market.
To support our planning efforts in the neighborhoods.
Other questions?
As you think about this one, you might think back to the last time you had to make a decision, because we had criteria, we had scoring, and then every project's in front of the council, and they all were very good projects. And what's important is to pick the one, as Matt said, which one has the best chance of meeting the state's criteria and getting funded. And the wow factor, which wow sometimes I use as negative, but the wow or the transformative I think is very important because it gives you leeway in making that decision at the end of the day, but yet the other criteria and the points allow you to sort out, and the staff will do that. This is number one, number two. These are the two we think are the best according to the points, but you'll still have that ability to look at it and say, you know, this fits the community the best. Matt and Mary, does this fit the criteria? These are the two we want to do. But you might remember back to the decision you had to make before. If there's anything that you remember that, gosh, if only we had rated X, it would have made our decision easier, just let us know.
Okay. So we'll actually be taking action on this tonight at the council?
No, it's not on the council agenda. There's no formal action that we're asking you to take, but we're showing you the criteria, and, go ahead, Larry.
These are staff's criteria that
Yes.
we're going to give to the developers so they can put their pack together, because they have very little time to do that. But we want to make sure that they're parallel with how you'd like to see a decision made when staff brings them to you. So we're going to be moving forward relatively quickly.
We just learned about this on Wednesday. And so we've been working fast, and that's why we're not reinventing the wheel. That's why we're going to change some dates and a couple of sentences and use the same RFP we used last time, because we don't have time to get, we want to give developers, we don't want to force developers to turn something around in 2 or 3 weeks, so we want to get it in their hands fast.
Okay, you say a plan for environmental issues, what does that mean?
That means if you have a known soil contamination on your infill site, that you have a plan and a budget for dealing with it, so that you don't just make a guess of what you're dealing with, or if you think you have asbestos or your building's of the age that it's going to have asbestos and you need to do a remediation, that you have had a consultant look at it and you have a budget. We don't want unknowns derailing a project, so we'll review any projects that, so for example, one that came in last year was Madison Flats, the project that NDC did on Indianola. We knew that there were soil contamination issues in that, and they very thoroughly addressed that in their application. So we knew the cost and the time frame to dealing with that issue.
Okay, so talk to me about, is there anything on here relating to green standards?
Yes,
Either green infrastructure or...
They'll all be required, all be required to follow the State's Green Streets program, and that's where we'll have some opportunity is in the WOW and transformative measures. If someone wants to come in with a LEED Platinum building, we can score them higher on those transformative measures and the WOW factor of the project.
You say you can. How are you going to do that? Having spent a little bit of time with HUD in knowing that they are participating in trying to make a transformative impact in terms of energy consumption, healthy buildings, and all that sort of thing. How is it spelled out so a developer understands that and I understand it?
Yeah.
Could you come up to the microphone, please?
Mary Niederbach with the City Planning Department. Last time what we did, and I was planning on doing this in addition, we gave extra points for LEED certified. That's the one way that the RITMA project was able to pick that up. We have extra points if a neighborhood actually endorsed the project. We require notification, but if they endorsed the project, then we gave extra points, and then we gave extra points for the LEED certification. But there is the Green Streets program that the state operates. They have added additional requirements to that, and there's actually a June 19th workshop over in Grinnell that they want people to attend so they understand more about the Green Streets. And the Green Streets focuses a lot on stormwater, which makes sense since it relates to the floods of 2008.
Right.
So how will all these people that's looking to maybe be involved in this know that there will be extra credit available?
What we sent out last time was a spreadsheet that staff uses to score the projects. I'm not sure that I brought one in, but I could forward that to everyone, and so it gets into the very specifics on how you would lose 5 points or gain 5 points. But
Mr. Mayor, would you like us to be under the transformative, very clear that here's one way you can look at transformative is going platinum LEED, so that they look at that as a way to gain those points specifically?
Yeah, but you would actually get extra points for being LEED Platinum, and the RITMA project, I forget if it was silver, but it's going to get extra points for that.
And if we strive for even higher, that would be nice. I just want to be able to...
But he couldn't guarantee, he didn't want to, not guarantee, do something.
I just, if, in case I ever run into a HUD person and they ask what we're doing in that regard, and I don't have a very good explanation of it, probably wouldn't be very helpful to our...
I think the other key, though, thing then is in the environmental review, that we do look at all those issues before we get started. We're really expecting them to have a phase 1 done, so that if there is an issue with any of those pollutants, we're dealing with that and right up front. So I think that's another key thing for HUD. And noise is also a big issue for HUD.
getting to be more and more having to do with what you use, how you build it, how long it lasts, how healthy the building is.
Yes.
How energy efficient the building is, what you're doing with on-site storage of stormwater, whether you're using it, reusing it, what's happening with all that. Looking across the river at the World Food Prize, great example of not only historic work, but how one would think about buildings in the 21st century. And I think HUD is getting close to wanting us to have that same understanding.
Yes, I think so too.
We can make the city's criteria reflect those issues straight on, so people know that's something that they really need to explore and show us what they can do.
Thanks. Anybody have anything else? All right, thank you very much, staff. The only other thing, I believe, on our agenda today is a public comment. Anybody in the public have any thoughts, questions, anything they need to have clarified?
Council, my name's Matt Connolly, Generation Green Builders and Iowa Realty of the Connolly Realty Group.
Nice T-shirt, by the way.
Thank you, sir. So as far as LEED goes on the criteria that was just discussed, and your involvement with HUD or relationship there, Rita Connor and I have talked, a few different people, and I have talked about designations and government specifically aligning themselves with the appropriate green certification guidelines. And City of Des Moines asked me to speak at a municipality green infrastructure event last year. And so it would be my recommendation to not align ourselves with LEED, which is super controversial around the world. And I know it's fine and I like it. I like other ones as well, but Energy Star has come a long ways. And Energy Star certification would rival LEED all day long as far as proper building techniques for our local environment. And I would just like that to be considered instead of, or at least along the side of, a LEED certified building. And for, to reiterate, for a government to align themselves, HUD, City of Des Moines, these state funds, the whole 9 yards, with an Energy Star program, which is so closely in line with the EPA, would be right in line, would be appropriate in my mind.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Anybody have anything else? Seeing none, thank you all for attending. We will have city council meeting this evening. Those of you who are interested, start at 4:30. This meeting's adjourned.
You gonna grab her?
Yeah.
Because Ron just texted me.